Today we're going to be tying up a deer hair caddis indicator fly. What this is used for is to mostly so I can add a dropper to the very bottom of my fly line of my tippet, and then this will stay floating on the top. There's a good chance a fish will take it if caddises are out, or if it's just a fish that's not paying attention. But mostly it's to float and serve as a strike indicator. Because it's deer hair, it's going to float, it's not going to sink on you, and it's got some added things to it that will make it much more visible on the water. Sometimes I have a hard time seeing my indicator fly when I'm on the water. So I'll just tie this on to a piece of tippet, probably about 6 to 7 inches, and then the rest of my leader down to the bottom of my tippet, I'll tie on the dropper fly that I'm using, whether that's a scud, sow bug, perdigon, midge pattern. That's the key, is it's going to be dangling down here below this fly in the water, and then when a fish takes that smaller fly, this will be your strike indicator. So let's go ahead and get to it. For our deer hair indicator pattern, I'm going to just put this on a size 16 hook. I'll usually tie these on a 16 or an 18, and I'm just laying down an undercoat of black GSP, just so we're not tying our initial materials here on the bare hook. Go ahead and cut off that excess, and then I'll just go ahead and continue this back to where we want the abdomen on the fly to start. I'm going to start that about right there, and I'll just take a wrap or two forward. So we're going to add a nice little hot spot on the back end of this pattern, and I'm just using some Glo Brite in a color that's not shocking, but is visible. So I'm just going to cut that, or fold that in half, and once I have that kind of loop, I'm just going to tighten that loop down. You don't have to be overly particular with that. We want to make sure this is secured to the very top of the shank of our hook. So we'll let that thread pull that over, secure it down. Once I've got a couple wraps on it, I'm going to take these two butt ends and I'm going to fold them back as well. I'm going to take both of those together and we're going to secure them together to the top of the hook. The GSP will let me pull this pretty tight just so that we can control the thickness of what's going on here. So we're left with this here, and we'll grab our scissors, and we want to cut this off about just a little bit beyond the bend of the hook. And that's going to give us a nice little bright spot, hot spot on the back end of the fly. So from here we're going to tie in a couple of materials we're going to use for the abdomen on the fly. We're going to start with a medium-sized piece of tinsel, kind of that pearl color. We'll just draw that back to about where we want the abdomen to end, and we'll tie it right on back to where we want that abdomen to start. And next we're going to tie in a piece of monofilament. This just happens to be 6X tippet material that I've preserved from prior years when I've changed out my tippet, which I try to do at least yearly or every other year so it doesn't grow old and brittle. I'm going to do the same thing here. Go ahead and draw that back. Get that tied in right where we want that abdomen, the back of the abdomen to start. We'll just go ahead and move forward slowly and secure those two materials down to the hook shank. From there I'm going to go ahead and move right on back to where we're going to start with our dubbing. For our dubbing, I'm just going to use a little wisp of Superfine. This is a sand or a light brown tannish color. That's my go-to based on the kind of bugs that we have in the waters that I typically fish. I'm going to go ahead and get this dubbed on fairly tight. This is one place where you can and should change up the pattern based on the color of the caddises that are in your area and the time of year and even the waters that you fish. So you might be using an olive dubbing, you might be using a darker brown color dubbing. But here we're going to go ahead and use this tan. Make sure we get our first wrap right here at the rear end of the abdomen. One thing that I often forget and don't include, and I don't know if it makes a huge difference to the fish, but just simply remembering that caddisflies tend to be reverse tapered, meaning they're a little thicker towards the back and then they grow slimmer or thinner as they move forward. So it's kind of the opposite of what we're used to tying when we're putting dubbing on. So I'm going to work on just kind of creating that hint of a reverse taper. Next, we're just going to grab hold of this Mirage tinsel. Go ahead and get that started here at the back of the abdomen, and it's only going to take a few wraps. Again, kind of open as we move forward towards the front end of our abdomen. Once we have it up where we want it, go ahead and grab my bobbin. I'm going to go ahead and secure that tinsel down. So it's very slippery stuff, so you want to make sure you have it good and secure. Tying over the top of it, and then what I like to do is tie behind it or back towards the eye of the hook, and then actually tie over the top of it, just to secure it as good as I can. From there I can come on in with my scissors and we'll just clip off the excess. Well, finally I'm going to grab my monofilament, and I'm just going to cross wrap that over this Mirage. And being monofilament, you're really not going to see this at all, but it'll make this fly much more durable. Fish chomps down on that Mirage tinsel, and they do it a couple of times and it's just going to come apart, and this monofill will just help that last longer, stay in place a little bit longer. So tie it up to about the same spot again, maybe wrap back on it, go ahead and turn my vise and get access to that. We'll just clip that off nice and close. For the wing, I tend to like to use a bleached deer hair. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to see. And always when you're tying with deer hair, elk hair, you'll notice there's a bunch of goop and fuzz here. So you want to make sure you comb that fuzz out. So just pinch your clump really tight and run it through a comb a couple of times to remove some of that fuzz. And then I'll clinch it, turn it around the opposite way. Again, pinch it really tight so I don't lose too many of those hairs. You can see you lose some of them. But I'm going to run the tops through as well to try to get rid of as much of that fuzz as I can. That'll help you stack this much better, and it'll give you a much firmer wing. Now, after I've stacked this deer hair, the tips are going to align much better. I'm going to take a measurement here. I want this to be just at the bend of the hook, and I know I'm going to be tying it in right about here, so I'm going to pinch this really tight right about here. After marking that position, I go ahead and cut the butt ends off, just like that. It's good to rotate your thread counterclockwise so it's going to come back towards my fingers when I take my wraps. This first one is really important. I'll take it kind of loosely over the top, and as it comes back towards me, I'm going to pull it tight. And it's going to do that wonderful splaying out that we expect our deer elk hair to do. We're going to be building a small head, so I'm just tying right on through this deer hair. And that's going to give us a nice wing that is approximately the right size. Next, I'm going to just take a small piece of kind of a amber burnt orange yarn, and I want this to extend over the top of the hook and over the wing. This will help us spot this even better in the water. So we're just going to take a nice wrap here, make sure we've got that on the top of the hook. I'm going to go ahead and tie this back, just securing it in place. We'll clean it up in a minute. come on in here with my scissors and clip the butt ends off of this really close. You can try to fish it this way. I don't know how well it would work, but typically I grab this. I want to cut this just a little tiny bit shorter than the length of those wings. So we just have this nice little orange spot. I'm going to go ahead and put my thread in a dubbing loop. We're going to tie in some CDC feathers to make this even buggier. Just going to tie that over the top. Get a couple of wraps around the base of it, then I can go ahead and tie back over the top of that so that the dubbing loop here begins right where I want it to begin. Now we're going to add just the tiniest wisp of the same color of dubbing, and we're going to use this to kind of cover up the thread wraps here. Remember to keep some distance behind the eye of the hook, because again, this is one of those patterns where you can really easily crowd the eye. Once I've got that dubbing on, I can go ahead and take it around. We'll tighten it down. I want to make sure that it's going over the right up against our wing there. I'll keep tightening this down as we wrap forward. Let's get that a little bit tighter on these last couple of wraps here. And I'm being very mindful, as I said, about keeping at least an eye length open behind the eye of the hook. When I'm working with CDC like this, I tend to like to use a clip like this. And I've got actually two feathers. I've worked on kind of stroking out some of those fibers. I'm just going to take this clip, leaving enough space for me to cut right off between the stem and the other end, and then we'll have the complete other side we could use for another fly. So at this point you should have some of those fibers cut off, sitting in our clip just like that. I've opened up my dubbing loop here, and I gently slide those fibers on. Let that dubbing loop close while I release that from the clip. From here I can go ahead and pull some of the fibers through and down, get rid of whatever that is, and we're going to go ahead and just spin this up really nice and good. Thread is a little bit longer than I would usually prefer, but that will be covered up as we start. So once those fibers start going down, we'll just take wraps one in front of the other through that dubbing that we put in place, and we'll move up towards the eye of the hook, in this case until we're pretty much out of the dubbing and off of the dubbing loop. With that, you can kind of stroke some of that material back as you're making a couple of these final wraps to secure your dubbing loop. Then I'll just take this dubbing loop here, I'll come on in with my scissors and we can go ahead and detach that. From here, if you feel like you need it, I do like these swept back a little bit more, so I'll pull them back and tie a few more wraps back over the top of those fibers there. And that's just going to help them lay back a little bit. Then we're going to go ahead and take a few wraps. We'll go ahead and give ourselves a little bit of extra thread here. We'll grab our whip finisher. Most of these wraps need to be going from behind the eye of the hook more towards the back. Go ahead and release that, grab our thread cutter and remove our thread. From here, there is a little bit of trimming in order. I want these to be long and dangly, but I don't want them to extend like 2 hook lengths longer than what my hook is. I'm going to go ahead and trim a few of those back. Make sure you do the underneath as well. And then if I've got some of these that just won't cooperate, I'll just come on in and clip those off as well, just to kind of clean up that head. With that, you have it. The deer hair Caddis indicator pattern, great pattern to use. The deer hair will keep it floating. It's not going to sink on you. We've added this nice hot spot in the back and this yellow or orange to our wing to make this even more visible on the water. So when you're fishing with a dropper behind this, this is going to be kind of like a strike indicator. Your dropper will be down behind and underneath. If a fish takes that dropper, this is going to go down just like a strike indicator. But you have the added bonus that a fish may just take your caddis fly as well. So throw a hook in the vise and give this one a shot.